So, John, one of the reasons I contacted you was this piece that I read that you wrote, in fact, that you presented overseas for the Stichting. And it was really about the Expropriation Act. And something that caught my attention was your discussion about the fact that very few people seem to understand that when one talks about property, which is the subject of expropriation, one's not necessarily talking about land or even land improvements, but property in general.
Mhm.
Explain that, please.
Okay, so I must make a preliminary remark on that, which is that the most important number in South Africa, or the most important economic number, is 15%. And 15% is the rate of gross fixed capital formation, which means as a share of GDP, how much money gets put into factories, into machines, into ports and railways, and all the stuff that you need to make stuff and to ship stuff to customers. So
Are
that,
you
that number is
talking,
really,
are you talking here about fiscal allocation?
no, this is both private and public sector investment in
Okay.
fixed assets. And it's about 5 percentage points public and 10 percentage points private. And both of those numbers are too low. So the global average for that number, which in South Africa is 15, is 26. And the target for South Africa's government is 30, which is the target they set for themselves in the National Development Plan. And many emerging economies are above 30, like at 35, 36. Without that, the economy can't grow, jobs can't be created, and we're going to be stuck in the situation that we're in. Why is the number so low? One of the main reasons is that investors are worried about their property. They're worried about their property rights. They think like, if I invest in South Africa, is my factory going to get burnt down? Is my expat manager going to get murdered on the way to work? Is the government going to come up with some new rule that's going to reduce my rights to control my own property? And in this environment of 15% fixed capital formation, the government comes with the Expropriation Act saying any asset in South Africa that belongs to a foreigner or a local person, no matter if it's land or buildings or patents or company shares or pension savings or a coin collection, like anything that can be owned is defined as property. All of these things fall under the purview of the Expropriation Act. Like there's no exception. Secondly, when they expropriate you, you get compensation. Okay, but how much compensation do you get? You might think market value, like if your company shares are worth, 1,000 rand, you get expropriated, you get 1,000 rand. No, it goes on the rule of just and equitable compensation, allowing for deviations below market value. And that is a huge concern because again, imagine this investor in Europe who's got a 50 million euros that he wants to put into South Africa. And he speaks to an advisor in South Africa, says, just take me through the risks. Like, what do I need to know? I've heard about this Expropriation Act. Is that a risk? And you've got to tell the guy, look, you may think that if you avoid land, your investment is safe because this Expropriation Act is only about land. You have to tell him, actually, that's not right. Like, no matter what you invest in, it's at risk. If the guy asks you, okay, like, I hope it doesn't happen, but if it happens and I get expropriated, am I at least getting my value back? You have to tell him, well, maybe you won't, maybe you will, maybe you won't. You're going to get something just and equitable, which where market value is like one of the factors that goes into it, but also the purpose of the expropriation goes into it, and the history of acquisition and the current use. And you end up with a number that you sort of can't tie to anything. And you also can't contest it if you go to court. Like, what are you going to tell the judge? If you got 50% on the market value and this was declared just and equitable, you go to the judge and say, but I think it's not just and equitable. The judge is going to say, like, on what reason, on what grounds? Like, what's your argument? What?
I notice in your frequently asked questions, you're asked that question about whether or not one can depend on the courts, and your answer is not necessarily. Courts
Mm.
may always rule with the state.
Yeah, they often do on matters of ideology. So the courts, they do demonstrate independence when it comes to matters of corruption, for example, or, gross bad behavior by the state. But on matters of ideology, they're pretty much aligned with the state. So anything transformation related, basically the courts uphold what the government wants. And this is transformation related, or it can be at least, this whole expropriation thing.
So in the short term, there's not really a lot that can be done to kick up from 15 to 30%, even though government says they want to be at 30%,
Mm.
because of their very instruments that they're now promulgating, such as the Act itself,
Yeah,
or
exactly. So
the vagaries in the Act.
yes. And that's our sense is that actually you can get investment up quite fast because South Africa is a type of country that can spark an investment frenzy. Like if you take the brakes off the economy and you remove these obstacles to investment, this is a great place to invest in. It's got so much potential. It's got a big labor force, lots of mineral riches, resources, linkages to global markets, infrastructure, skills, innovation, creative thinking. Like it's a brilliant place. But you've got to take these brakes off, take these obstacles away, and let investors earn money in South Africa. And then you can get the investment rate up. But for that, you've got to get rid of the Expropriation Act. On that, Donald Trump was right. With his executive order, this is a businessman giving business advice. He's saying, you want your economy to grow, you want your people to do well, you can't have an Expropriation Act. That's not going to work. And your race-based policies are also not going to work. Take those things away. Be a successful country that we can deal with. Get your economy growing. Make your people richer.
But John, we're nowhere close to either of those things happening. The Expropriation Act, which has just been forced through, is very unlikely to even be amended in this regard because there's no compunction on the ruling party to amend that act. And certainly they have the backing of at least 8 of the GNU partners not to have to do something like that. And as far as the 142 odd pieces of legislation with race-based components in them, I can say from a Boosa perspective and from a Nedlac perspective, I don't see that happening in the short term. So, what is your message to South African businesses?
So one of my messages to South African businesses is, you're in it for the long term if you're going to be in it. And that's, I think, also a characteristic of an organization like mine with this 90 plus year history. Like we know, like stuff takes time. Overthrowing apartheid took, 40 years, 50 years of hard work. Doesn't matter, you still stick with it. And I would also say that in the current environment, I'm detecting a distinct shift in the political balance of power. So I did my PhD work on change management, and one of the most basic models that exist is Levin's model from 1947, where it says if you want to change something, you unfreeze it first, then you go through a move phase, and then you refreeze it in the new configuration, whatever it is. South Africa for 30 years under the ANC was in a solid phase. It's now unfreezing and is beginning to move. And we're going to get into some new configuration, and hopefully that's going to be a more pro-growth and pro-investment configuration. That's what we were working towards. We want this country to grow. We want people to do well here. And politically, the ANC is in real trouble at the moment. It's what it is selling is not what voters are buying. It is beset from all sides. Like the Americans are causing trouble, and there's AfriForum, and there's the health industry suing them over NHI. And there's all the World Bank report on BEE being a barrier to growth. And in the polling, they're down to 32%. And if you take Ramaphosa out the equation, you imagine that he loses a vote of no confidence and is no longer part of the scene. Support for the ANC drops to 20% in the polling. Like this is a party in real trouble. And there's actually only one way to salvage this, and this is to go for growth. Like anything else, like a worsening of the situation, this bad governance that we've been having is going to just drop them further and further, and eventually they're heading for oblivion if they don't change.